So I'm pretty sure that when I say Japanese armor, the first thing that will come to your mind are samurai. Samurai wearing lamellar armor with colorful silk ties and an elaborate helmet. However, this was not always the case, and in fact, before the samurai, different types of warriors existed in the Japanese archipelago who wore different types of armor. And today, I want to go back to the Kofun period. I want to look at the first kind of iron armor that appeared in the Japanese archipelago. So what we're going to do is look at the examples that still exist of that kind of armor in museums collections. We will look at how this kind of armor was depicted in art, in clay figures of the time, and also talk about what it meant for warriors of the time to be wearing this armor politically as well. So let's jump right in. We have talked about the Kofun period on my channel before, but for today, what you need to know is that from the half of the 3rd century until the half of the 6th century, the Japanese archipelago was divided into proto-states, or what we call polities. And at this time, large border mounds in the shape of keyholes and other shapes as well were being built as burials for the deceased leaders of these regional proto-states. When buried in these tombs after their death, these leaders were accompanied by treasured objects such as bronze mirrors and beautiful ornaments. And from the 4th century onwards, they started being buried with arms and armors as well. This shows how society at the time was becoming more militarized, and also the kind of military political alliances which were being created at the time. And Kofun acted as kind of repositories for all of this material culture. So the armors that we're going to see today, the most outstanding pieces of armor from the Kofun period, were found in the Kofun. So for the first thing of today, let's look at this type of armor called Tankō, which is dated to the early Kofun period. This armor was used from around the end of the 3rd century, and it is believed, or it is considered, the first identifiable type of armor that we know of in the Japanese archipelago. It is believed, it has been hypothesized that armor existed before the Tankō, but probably it was made of leather, and so we don't have intact remains and examples of this kind of armor. But Tankō was made of iron, and it has lasted well until our days. The name Tankō literally translates as short armor. However, we should keep in mind that this is a name that was later attributed. However, we do not know what people at the time actually called it. The Tankō was made of large iron plates and tanned leather. The leather served as a support for the iron plates and also as a kind of protective lining to protect the wearer's clothing and skin. And originally, the iron plates were fastened together with leather straps. However, later it became more common for them to be joined with rivets. And the Tankō featured hinges at the sides, so it could be tightened at the hips to conform to the wearer's body. And also the front of the Tankō could be opened so that it could be worn and then closed. And the armor was kept up, propped up on the body by fabric bands that ran over the shoulders. We can see the upper part of the back side, which kind of fanned out to protect the shoulders. And this has, of course, a practical use, but we can also give credit to this beautiful curved shape, which shows us that there was already a certain attention being paid to the aesthetic side of things. So this was a general look at Tankō armor, at the shape of Tankō armor, but not all Tankō looked the same. In fact, we are looking now at two different appearances of Tankō. We can see that one was made of horizontal iron plates, while the other one differs, as in it featured triangular iron plates. And this is because Tankō could vary in its construction. The iron plates could vary in their shapes and sizes and ways that they were attached to each other. And this is because Tankō wasn't like a uniform type of armor. And having this variety, it reflected regional differences, technological innovations coming through, arriving to the Japanese archipelago, as well as adaptation to the ongoing needs of this militarizing society. We can notice, however, a certain level of uniformity in Tankō produced under the control of certain polities. For example, the Tankō produced under the control of the Yamato polity is kind of uniform in its shapes. And the Yamato polity was rising to prominence from the 1st to 5th centuries, and he was producing this Tankō and actually gifting it to other regional leaders as part of a strategy to consolidate its power and create alliances. So to receive such armor for a warrior, it didn't simply strengthen them militarily, which of course it did, but it also became a symbol of legitimacy and authority. So by wearing this armor, as well as having it buried with them, the armor worked as a status symbol, as a kind of badge of their position. The construction of Tankō armor was certainly influenced by the continent, by the East Asian continent, for example China and the Korean peninsula, and most especially the Gaya Confederacy, which was located in the southern part of the Korean peninsula. The Gaya Confederacy peaked in metallurgy and in iron construction, and we can see armors from the Gaya Confederacy which are very close to Tankō armor in appearance. Because of these similarities and because of evidence that has been found of trading between the Confederacy and the Japanese archipelago, it is believed that the Confederacy played a major role in the development of Tankō armor in the Japanese archipelago. So something that I thought would be fun to do, interesting and useful, is look at how this armor was depicted in art of the time, and in this case I want to look at Haniwa. Once again, I have a whole video about Haniwa on my channel, so if you want to learn how they were developed, what were they for, go have a look. But for now, what you need to know is that Haniwa were clay figures which were placed on the burial mounds Kofun. And Haniwa came in many different shapes, houses, animals, arms, armors and warriors. So let's have a look at this Haniwa of a warrior wearing Tankō armor. This Haniwa was made in the 6th century, representing a 5th century warrior, it is believed. And we can see that just like many other Haniwa, it is kind of simple in its design, but it's still able to realistically portray the characteristics of armor and weaponry of a warrior of that era. We can see that his torso is covered with armor made up of large iron plates. We can see lines on the clay that were used to demarcate the outline of the iron plates, with round nodules which were used to depict the rivets. We can also note the straps passing over the shoulders. The warrior is also wearing a helmet, a necklace around his wide neck, and he has a sword on his left hip. It's always interesting to look at the faces of Haniwa. We can see in this case as well his features deep-set eyes, a sharp nose and a sharp chin, and a slightly open mouth, which is typical of Haniwa figures. And the curators of the Tokyo National Museum, they noticed that the warrior's neck seems slightly turned to the left, almost as if he was looking out for something. This warrior's attention was caught by something. From the late 5th century, we also see the introduction of a new type of armor into the archipelago. This one as well was influenced from the East Asian continent, and similar types of armors were being worn in China, in the Tibetan plateau, and in the Korean peninsula. And this was lamellar armor. This means that it was made up of hundreds of small overlapping scales or plates, which are called lamellae. These were made of iron or hardened leather and laced together with cords. This kind of armor often included torso protection as well as a skirt-like component which helped protect the lower abdomen, the hips, and the upper thighs. Compared to Tankō, this kind of armor allowed for more mobility, and it is believed that it was to be used by warriors on horseback. And generally this armor is considered the direct ancestor of kinds of armors used later by the samurai, such as the Oyuroi and Domaru. And this armor is called Keikō, which translates as hanging armor. However, once again, we should keep in mind that this is a later name. So we don't have many fully intact examples of Keikō armor that we can look at, but what we have, once again, is Haniwa. So let's look at this Haniwa from the collection of the Tokyo National Museum. This is considered a national treasure. We can see how he's wearing this armor made up of small iron plates laced together, and also featuring a skirt-like part protecting the thigh area. And also we can see different parts of the armor protecting different body parts, such as the shoulders, knees, arms, the shins, and even shoes. And very interestingly, we can look at the back of the Haniwa, and it shows how the armor was fastened together with strings. He's also wearing a helmet and holding a sword in his right hand. And once again, we can see his undecipherable expression with deep, hollow eyes and a small, hollow mouth. And the way that this Haniwa has been described is as a kind of determined look, as a fully armored, fully armed warrior with a serious and determined expression. So both Haniwa that we looked at were wearing helmets, and in fact we see the appearance of different types of helmets during the Kofun period, and today I want to look at two types. The first type of helmet that I want to look at today is this kind of visored helmet, which is called in Japanese Mahizashi Kabuto. This is a type of iron helmet. As we said, it features a visor almost like a baseball cap, and it is made up of small iron plates which are connected with rivets. Just like when talking about armors, the iron plates and the rivets used in the helmet were technologies introduced from the Korean peninsula. So let's look at an example of this helmet, which is considered one of the best preserved to our days. We can see that it features a visor with an open work pattern. It is believed that this object was more a valuable object and a symbol of power and authority rather than something to be used in actual combat. And it has been hypothesized that this object may have been made in the Yamato polity and then gifted to a regional leader. As we said, the Yamato polity distributed this object as symbols of alliances and connections and authority. The other type of helmet that I want to look at, they are today called the beaked helmets. Beaked helmets appeared towards the end of the early Kofun period, and they are considered to be unique in their shape to the Japanese archipelago. This helmet came in two types. One was leather bound, in which the iron plates were bound with leather straps, and one was riveted. So again, the plates were fastened with rivets. And the one that we're seeing today is a riveted helmet. The helmet featured this kind of protuberance at the front of its bowl shape, which is said by Japanese historians and curators to resemble the prow of a ship. So the Japanese name for this type of helmet is Shokakutsuki, which translates as featuring a naval ram. And as we can see, this helmet's shape is rather simple. The technology used to create it is also rather simple. However, it has also been stated that the helmet exudes a kind of modern sense of beauty in this simplicity. And actually, many of these armor pieces that we have seen today, they do seem rather simple in their construction, in their iron plates. However, we should keep in mind that this simplicity is apparent, and actually it conceals this whole world of connections through East Asia and influences from one area of East Asia to another, for example, from the Korean Peninsula to the Japanese archipelago. And also they conceal these alliances, for example, this distribution of armor from the Yamato polity to other regional polities. And in a way they materialize, the armor themselves materialize, and they embody in their simple appearance these international connections as well as regional politics. So that was it for today's video. I actually really enjoyed researching armors of the Kofun period. I learned a lot, and I hope that you also feel like you learned a lot watching this video. So if you did, leave me a comment and click like, subscribe, the usual stuff. And if you want to support the channel, there's ways to do so in the description. You can have a look. But for now, I just thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!